Thanks for joining us this half hour for World News. I'm Amarachi Ubana. Here's what's up ahead. Typhoon Kalmaegi makes landfall in Vietnam after killing over 100 people in the Philippines. World leaders gather in Brazil, including Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima for COP30. Plus, the U.S. Transport Secretary plans to cut flights at 40 airports over government shutdown. Let's begin the world today. We have our eyes on Typhoon Kalmaegi, the most powerful storm in the year to hit Asia. It's made landfall in Vietnam, packing winds of up to 92 miles per hour. Vietnam is said to already be battling record rains and floods and has got more than 260,000 of its soldiers on standby for rescue efforts. About 30 minutes after Kalmaegi made landfall, hundreds of residents in two communes of Dak Lak province called for help. People reported that their homes had collapsed or been flooded, while strong winds and heavy rains continue to batter the area. Meanwhile, more than 50 flights have been cancelled or rescheduled. About 8 airports in the central region, including the international airport in Da Nang, have either been suspended operations or are preparing to do so. Back in the Philippines, already hit by Typhoon Kalmaegi, rescue workers are searching for survivors in Cebu City. Emergency responders are continuing to work to find those survivors at the site of a landslide caused by heavy rains. There are reported at least 114 deaths in the Philippines as a result of Typhoon Kalmaegi, which brought more than a month's worth of rains in a few hours to the Philippines. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has declared a state of emergency, the threshold of which involves mass casualty, major damage to property and disruption to means of livelihoods and the normal way of life for people in the affected areas. Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima has joined more than 140 other delegations, over 170 accredited leaders in the Brazilian Amazon for the Leaders Summit in Belém, Pará, Brazil. The Brazilian government says the goal of the summit is to align commitments and lay the groundwork for negotiations that will take place during COP30 coming up next week, which Brazil will host also in the capital of Pará. The Vice President will address world leaders plenary today, and he is scheduled to join the Tropical Forest Forever Fund, a roundtable on climate and nature chaired by President Lula Inácio da Silva, before attending an Amazonian cocktail reception for heads of delegations hosted by the Brazilian president.
Manifestação da cultura nacional transformada pelo presidente Lula.
Well, back here on the continent, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa says he's received distress calls from 17 citizens who have joined mercenary forces in Russia-Ukraine conflict. He's ordered an investigation into the circumstances that led to the recruitment of the men aged between 20 and 39 years. Working as a mercenary or fighting on behalf of another government is illegal in South Africa unless the government authorizes it. The government says the men were lured to join the mercenary forces under the pretext of lucrative contracts. Meanwhile, President Ramaphosa has received a G20 Global Inequalities Report, which provides solutions and guidelines on how G20 countries should tackle inequalities. Professor Joseph Stiglitz handed over the report to President Ramaphosa in Parliament in Cape Town. The president addressing inequality is an inescapable generational challenge. Our South Africa correspondent, Innocent Amosa, has more.
The G20 Global Inequality Report presented to President Cyril Ramaphosa by renowned economist Professor Joseph Stiglitz highlights growing disparities in income access to resources and opportunities across member states. It urges governments to adopt inclusive growth strategies, strengthen social safety nets, and ensure fair taxation systems to close the gap between the rich and the poor.
What we do in the report is, as I say, is try to draw upon the wide body of knowledge that has developed, talk about what are the multiple dimensions of inequality. It's not just income and wealth inequality, it affects health, it affects access to justice, education, every aspect of our lives. And what are the trends? What are the interrelationships between these various factors that are aspects of inequality?
President Ramaphosa says the report comes at a critical time as South Africa continues efforts to tackle poverty, unemployment, and inequality access to basic services. He says discussions with other G20 leaders will focus on translating the report's recommendations into concrete global action.
And this is the first time that a report of this nature and on a matter so fundamental, so important to global stability and human progress is presented for consideration by the G20. It's not that South Africa wanted to shock and awe other members of the G20, but we wanted this matter to be addressed because it is important. For inequality does not only reside in South Africa, it's pervasive all over the world.
The report also emphasizes that addressing inequality is not only a moral obligation, but essential for sustainable economic growth and social stability. From Pretoria, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
Staying with the G20, U.S. President Donald Trump will not be heading to South Africa like other world leaders. Speaking in the United States at the American Business Forum on Wednesday, President Trump said South Africa should not even be in the G20. Trump has repeatedly accused South Africa of discriminating against its white minority and says he will not be attending the meeting but will be sending Vice President J.D. Vance instead. The South African government has glossed over President Trump's statement, choosing to focus on the upcoming summit. Presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwenya said South Africa is confident it would host a very successful G20 summit when leaders meet in Johannesburg later this month.
For generations, Miami has been a haven for those fleeing communist tyranny in South Africa. I mean, if you take a look at what's going on in parts of South Africa, look at South Africa, what's going on. Look at South America, what's going on. You know, I'm not going to, we have a G20 meeting in South Africa. South Africa shouldn't even be in the Gs anymore because what's happened there is bad. I'm not going. I told them I'm not going. I'm not going to represent our country there. It shouldn't be there.
U.S. President Donald Trump, and over in his country, air travel could be disrupted in parts of the U.S. if and when Transport Secretary Sean Duffy cuts travel capacity by up to 10% at 40 major airports over the coming days, as if the government shutdown continues. The decision, which is expected to affect domestic flights only, was made because air traffic controllers had been reporting fatigue. The head of the Federal Aviation Administration said at a briefing alongside Duffy recently, some 1.4 million federal workers from air traffic controllers to park wardens are working right now without pay or are on forced leave because the U.S. Congress has not agreed a federal funding budget. Unions say many employees are becoming ill with stress or are being forced to take a second job. The flight reductions will be gradual, starting at 4% of domestic flights on Friday, then rising to 5% on Saturday and 6% on Sunday. That's before hitting the full 10% next week. The names of the affected airports or high traffic locations will be released later today. Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird joins us now for more on this. Maria, those airports that will be affected by the cut are local airports, we understand, but there will be some impact on international travel, right?
Yes, you're exactly correct. These are local airports, but because of the fact that most of the time many people are transferring between maybe going from a smaller airport to a larger airport like the Charlotte, Washington, New York. And so because of that, that will impact international travel. We are seeing a major backup in the airport, so people aren't able to make their flights oftentimes because, as you mentioned, people are fatigued, they're tired, they're having to work sometimes extended hours because others are deciding not to come in because they're not being paid. So this is a real trickling effect of the government shutdown, and obviously we still don't know when we could see an end to it.
I can imagine, and as you just rightly pointed out, it is a result of the federal government shutdown, which has already affected over 4,000 jobs, we understand. Will people be affected, those who are affected, will they be reinstated as soon as government resumes?
So the thought is, and what our understanding is that those who are furloughed right now, who still have their jobs, will be reinstated. The challenge, though, is, as you know, their paychecks won't come as soon as they get to work. It typically takes about 2 weeks to 4 weeks for someone to see a paycheck because those furlough days, unless the government decides otherwise, are stated to be non-pay days. So they will not necessarily be reimbursed for those days. And so the other challenge that potentially we're facing is that could there be some layoffs once individuals get back to work, which obviously could be a case now as well. And there's just so many impacts of this government shutdown that we're seeing with food insecurity, housing insecurity, and the list just continues.
What other parts of U.S. industry and operations could be affected or are already being affected by the government shutdown, Maria?
Well, obviously, all of our parks and museums and what people come here to visit, especially in Washington, it's a place that many tourists come throughout the year to visit some of these monumental locations, obviously. So tourism is being impacted, which obviously is a revenue generator for Washington and many other cities across the country. In addition to that, people are experiencing a shortage in what they call the SNAP benefits, which are subsidized meal opportunities for individuals where there's a funding source that they receive monthly for those who are below a certain economic level in our country. And so those have been challenged. So that means individuals are now relying on food banks and shelters to be able to receive food because they're not able to receive these funding sources to secure food from grocery stores.
And just on the side, of the government shutdown and its impacts, we understand longtime Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi has announced she will not be seeking re-election at Congress at the end of her tenure in January 2027. That's a long way ahead, Maria. She's been a force in U.S. politics as far as we can remember. How would her exit impact her constituency as well as the U.S. political landscape?
Well, as you mentioned, we're talking about a little over a year from now. So there's highly likely she will begin to mentor those. She has already been touted as a mentor to many young senators and congressmen and women throughout Washington. And so I think that she will continue to do that. Hopefully, by the time we get to that point, we are in a much better place. As you know, Democrats are very excited about the most recent election results. Democrats pretty much took over many of the elections across the country. And so the Democratic Party is hoping to position themselves in a way in which they will be prepared for the next presidential election. So I think that she's she's 85 years old, as you mentioned. I think she would prefer that her exit be one where she can have greatest impact versus her exit be something that is just, immediate and due to unfortunate circumstances.
Again, Maria, for bringing us up to speed on these issues in the United States. We're off on a short break now. Still ahead, Nigeria's former foreign think tank takes on the topic of UN's relevance in today's world in its foreign policy lecture. Just stay with us. Welcome back. A court in Aachen, Germany has sentenced a palliative care nurse to life in prison after he was convicted of the murder of 10 patients and the attempted murder of 27 others. Prosecutors alleged the man, who has not been publicly named, injected his mostly elderly patients with painkillers or sedatives in an effort to ease his workload during shifts overnight. The offences were committed between December 2023 and May 2024 in a hospital in Western Germany. Prosecutors told the court that he showed irritation and a lack of empathy to patients who required a higher level of care and accused him of playing master of life and death. Nigeria's former permanent representative to the United Nations and former president of the General Assembly, Professor Tijani Bande, says the UN as a body will not disintegrate or be replaced, despite its many challenges. He made the statement in a speech at the Foreign Policy Lecture Series of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs in Lagos, focused on the relevance of the United Nations in world order. The Foreign Policy Lecture Series at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs this time focused on the topic, Relevance of the United Nations in World Order, by former Nigerian Permanent Representative to the United Nations and former President of the General Assembly, Professor Tijani Bande. Representing the NIIA Director General, Professor Hosea Osage, who is unavoidably absent, Research Fellow at the Institute, Professor Chinasa Uhiri, in her welcome remarks, highlights the question of the UN still shaping world order despite its many challenges.
The United Nations remains the cornerstone of multilateral diplomacy, and for Nigeria, it holds a special place in our foreign policy. Since joining the United Nations in 1960, Nigeria has been an active voice for peace, justice, and cooperation. We have proudly contributed to peacekeeping missions across Africa and beyond, championed the cause of developing nations, and consistently called for reforms of the United Nations General Security Council to make it more inclusive and representative.
Professor Tijani Bande, who is no stranger to the NIIA, eagerly delves into the topic. He makes a case for the UN being a supporter of human rights, decolonization, and admits the faults of the world body, saying that not every peacekeeping effort has worked, and how importantly the UN considers the voice of every member of the organization. While he underlines the peculiarity of the size of the organization, he encourages Nigeria to play her own role.
We should build on the record as Nigeria of looking after Africa's interests alongside its own, because this record is there. And we should look continually to do better in anchoring our diplomacy in Africa. We should, of course, prioritize relations going to come for us and blocks around them. However, as veteran of this, Nigeria must continue to stand on justice and fairness for all, especially those who are we shouldn't stand on nothing. We must stand on something. We believe our constitution is very clear on this as to who we should support.
During the question and answer segment, he addresses the alleged Christian genocide going on in Nigeria's north.
When somebody says Muslims are being killed by Christians in Nigeria, I say Muslims are killing Muslims, Christians are killing Christians, but they are not doing so in the name of any religion, as I understand. So the generosity of Nigerians alone should tell us that. But from outside, some people will want to make this noise. From others, some people want to be shown with some Congress people, haven't told them stories, not understanding the danger they put themselves under. After they finish using them, when they say hello, they don't even answer. I have seen it happen. So I think it's not a nice situation to be in. Let our diplomats deal with this matter.
Other participants agree with Professor Bande's submissions.
We should rather have our own conversation within ourselves. We should discuss how we can stop unreasonable killing and harassment and banditry and all of that. These are vices that we should stop. We don't need anybody to come and tell us from outside.
Of course, there are real concerns about insecurity in Nigeria. The whole world knows that. The question is, what are we going to do about that? And the Nigerian government needs to act and needs to be seen to act effectively and justly to ensure lasting peace in our country.
The topic is inexhaustible. 80 years of the existence of the United Nations may not be crammed into a 1-hour lecture, but the seeds have been sown for participants to look closely and meaningfully at an organization that has brought countries around the world under its umbrella. Amarachi Ubani, Channels Television News. In a clear example of turning waste to art, Egyptian artist Wagdi Al-Ghazawi has made a name for himself by transforming discarded and unusable metal pieces into static and kinetic works of art crafted with skill and precision from a small workshop in Mitgamer. Wagdi was in his workshop on Wednesday using simple tools such as a wielding torch and an electric saw alongside shots of various finished artworks, including a metal sculpture of Al-Aqsa Mosque. On where his passion started, Wagdi explained that he has been collecting old scrap materials and trying to turn them into shapes. It started by making animal figures, aeroplanes, a car, and a small motorcycle, and then began creating many different shapes. And as we end the program, Lagos's Fashion Week has won an award at the annual Earthshot Award ceremony, which held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The category won the Build a Waste-Free World award. The Lagos Fashion Week was awarded for its transformation of the world's most wasteful industry by creating a new fashion economy. Brazilian and foreign celebrities joined Britain's Prince William in Rio at the star-studded ceremony to announce the winners of this year's Environmental Earthshot Prize. Launched in 2020 by the heir to the British throne, together with biologists and natural historian David Attenborough, it recognizes environmental innovators. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.